Thanks, Emily. Thanks, everyone, for joining our webinar session. So, as Emily mentioned before, I'm Jonathan Q, and I'm a change and adoption consultant working at Engage Squared, and I'm joined today by Sergeant Madeline Gillard. And I'll hand over to Maddie just to give us an introduction about herself and Victoria Police.
Yeah, so I'm a sergeant with Victoria Police. I currently work at the Media Comms and Engagement Department, and I am Victoria Police's Yammer Manager. So I am casting an operational lens over all of Yammer because my background within the police force is not comms. I have no marketing, no communications background whatsoever. I was a detective in the western suburbs of Melbourne before I came into this role. So everything I do, I put a lens over it of how can I help the front line? How can I solve crime? How can I keep the community safer? So we have over 22,500 Yammer users on our network. So that's both sworn police officers and civilian VPS staff. And we launched Yammer Force-wide in May of this year, and prior to that we had about 1,000 early adopters to sort of test the water. And prior to Yammer, we had broadcast one-way comms like global emails and a very, very outdated online forum that was basically a place for people to go to vent. And again, it was very one-way. We didn't sort of get too much leadership engagement with that.
Yeah, I think I remember you just ran reports on them and then fed it up, and that's all kind of...
Yeah, pretty much. The online forums were just a place for people to vent, and then we could sort of say to some leaders, this is what they're venting about, and we've sort of got a too bad, so sad next response. So Yammer's really opened up that conversation.
Well, I think let's just start off. Do you have any examples of any kind of hard conversations on your Yammer community?
Yeah, so the conversations we often have, not just on Yammer, but have been going on for years, beards, shorts and patches. So VicPol has a blanket ban on beards, which is most displeasing for a number of our employees. Shorts. People want to wear shorts in summer. I can understand it, but there's obviously reasons behind not wearing shorts. And the other one would be patches. So we have authorised patches and pins and whatnot that we can wear, but we have unauthorised ones too that are really popular. Old school is this, that's not going to work. It'll work if I put it in front of my tummy. So this is a thin blue line patch. So it's an Australian flag blackened out with a blue line through it. For police officers, this means, solidarity with all our police across the world. But unfortunately, this patch has been sort of adopted to mean other things by other people. And so sort of white nationalists have kind of corrupted it for us. So there's a blanket ban on wearing that, which has really upset a number of police officers. So Yammer has allowed us to have this discussion, not just sending out a global email saying that you can't wear it. We're allowed to have a discussion on Yammer about why we can't wear it and what it means to some people, and how we can wear things like pride flags and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags and the likes, but we can't wear this for these reasons. And it allows other people to weigh in too. So on our Yammer discussion about it, we had people, military veterans, weighing in on what the Australian flag means to them and how it's against the Flags Act to deface the flag or alter it in any way. And it also allows us to sort of bring relevant people into the conversation too. So I guess police love evidence. It's what we use in everything. So it's why. Sorry, Neil.
It's a lot better, Andrea. Right? So now it's cooling the house down. It's really good.
Sorry, I kind of missed that, Neil.
All right, might have been just an accident. That's
okay. So as I was saying, police love evidence, and if we give the how and why behind these decisions rather than just a broadcast then we're sort of halfway there. But we like to have these conversations in-house, because if we're not having them in-house, then they bubble over to things like Facebook and sort of unsecure apps that we sort of don't want people disseminating VicPol information on, because we like the security that that Yammer offers us, being the Microsoft suite. On the Microsoft suite. So in that situation, we were able to bring in assistant commissioners and also lower ranks who have more of an understanding of the how and why behind it.
Right. So I think that's great that you're able to bring kind of these people at different levels into that one conversation instead of having to go back and forth via a global email. So I think now thinking back to when we first started this Yammer project, and I think we planned a lot in a way. Yeah. There was a lot of discussions. But what are some things that we planned, that we weren't able to plan for, and something that could be used as a lesson learned for our community managers out there?
The biggest thing we focused on in the early adoption phases was leadership engagement. We were constantly pushing, get the leaders engaged, then everyone else will follow. That backfired. So Victoria Police, being a paramilitary organisation, we focus a lot on chain of command, and Yammer breaks down that chain of command and really allows every employee to all of a sudden have a voice and have a place to share that voice, which we previously haven't had. And that's a really foreign concept for our rank and file. So in corporate enterprise where everything's dollar driven or everything's for the shareholders or your next promotion, you want to curry favour with the bosses. In a paramilitary organisation, you play to your role. So breaking that rank and all of a sudden seeing that you have a voice and a place to share it was kind of a little bit scary for some people. And when Yammer was first launched, some of the feedback I was getting was it feels self-congratulatory. It feels like another place for leaders to broadcast themselves, which they can already do on any of our mainstream comms channels. So initially, the frontline staff felt that Yammer was just another place for command announcements. But we're really getting to now that it's a place for all employees, because gone are the days where people join VicPol as 18-year-olds fresh out of high school. They come to Victoria Police as professionals with a whole raft of experience that we haven't tapped into before, but now we have the place to. And you saw in an earlier presentation about how we're using Yammer to solve crime and increase efficiencies around that. We're also using it to solve issues like administrative burdens, and we've got police members who have previously worked in other jurisdictions, and they're able to weigh in on what was good about their previous jurisdiction and how we can change what we're doing around that.
Yeah. So I think managing difficult conversations is something that you're probably very experienced with as a police officer, as well as part of being the corporate communications. What kind of tactics do you use that has worked really well in Yammer so that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm a police officer first. I've worked for Victoria Police for 12 years. I was 18 when I first started, so I am the exception to the rule. I just discredited. But police officers typically aren't people's friends. We don't come into people's lives at the best point of their world. So I learnt really early on that you need to give people a reason why. Regardless of what you're doing or making them do, if they're under arrest or what have you, tell them why and explain each step of the process to them as you go. You can turn a no person into a yes person just by explaining the why. So, people often think or feel like the police are judge, jury and executioner, and that's just not the case. When someone's brought in for an interview, an interview is only to get their side of the story.
Right.
That's it. Whereas people think it's we're going to charge them. That's not the case. So if we could just explain that this is the place for them to have their side of the story and what happens next, that's how we manage the difficult conversations, with the people that we do arrest and whatnot. So bringing that over to Yammer, providing rationale behind decisions or changes rather than just announcing the changes that we previously have done in global emails and whatnot. They're halfway there to understanding why. Can you turn? Yeah, that's right. You can absolutely, just by explaining why. So the change, Kai, the change from it's for command broadcast to share things, the way we did that was very much focusing on our champions. So we let our champions, first of all, we identified the champions, and sometimes the champions were just people that I've previously dealt with across the organisation and just thought, you know what, this person isn't averse to change, this person's ready to have a red hot crack.
Yeah.
And if we can get them to encourage some of their, their little team, their work unit to jump on board and open their mind a little bit. Unfortunately, we're typically fairly averse to change, and I say we as an organisation. So we talk about not having technology, then we are provided with new technology, and we talk about the new technology. So it's about bringing the people who are open-minded and wanting to have a go into the conversation and showing that it works. I wholeheartedly believe from the second I saw Yammer as a product that we can make it work for VicPol. It wasn't designed for investigation. It wasn't designed for frontline policing, but I know we could make it work, and we have.
Yeah. I think just drawing on your kind of previous example, we do kind of, Yammer is a place for people to share their story, right? It's very similar to this investigative process as an organisation where you're getting people's side of the stories across the organisation in one place.
Yeah.
All right. So kind of also leading on from my previous question, has Yammer kind of changed how you've dealt with managing hard conversations outside of Yammer?
Yeah.
And do you have any examples of how you then brought that into Yammer to help with that discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to chuck a trigger warning on this. I'm going to discuss suicide and suicide of employees. So if this is something that is difficult for you, perhaps tune out for the next couple of minutes. But recently, unfortunately, one of our absolute stalwarts died by suicide. She'd worked for Victoria Police for over 33 years and was loved by all. And it pains me to say that because obviously she didn't feel that. She mightn't have felt that way. So prior to Kath's death, we had a whole big piece of work about how we communicate death of employees when it is clear they've died by suicide. And we don't want to shy away from the fact that someone has died by suicide if we know that to be the case. Suicide's not a dirty word. Mental health isn't something that we should hide and not talk about. But saying someone died sudden and unexpectedly and then putting a lifeline or a welfare line at the bottom, everyone knows what that means. So why are we hiding it? But then when we did finally, unfortunately, have our next death by suicide, and I say next, and it pains me to say that, but unfortunately that is the organisation, that we work in. Sometimes these things happen, and that's world over. So when it happened and we've got our first Kath died by suicide, it was really uncomfortable for a lot of people, and people never reply to these global emails because they come from a corporate comms inbox. People replied to this global email. People from both ends of the camp, people who were absolutely outraged that it was invasion of her privacy and we shouldn't be speaking about the death of somebody like this. But then on the flip side, we had people saying, thank you for being so open and honest and allowing open conversations about this so we can start to look at, perhaps preventing it in the future and those sorts of things. Thanks for chucking that in, Kai. So it was about so when we talk about managing these conversations, who's going to respond, when are they going to respond, and how are they going to respond? So it's not appropriate for me as a frontline manager to respond to these global emails saying, it was a decision made by the powers that be, deal with it. It's not the right, and it's also, we need to let the dust settle before. So that's the when and the how. We need to get the message out to everyone at the same time rather than firing back to each individual reply to the global email. Yeah. So we got the Deputy Commissioner to send out another email in about a week after the fact, explaining the rationale behind being open and honest about these conversations. And whilst it doesn't make it any less palatable to be talking about losing our colleagues and friends to suicide, but it allows us to have a sort of a more open and honest discussion about it. And I know that this has changed. This has had a flow-on effect with other organisations that, you know, colleagues and friends, their family work in, and they've considered adopting this sort of procedure in their own workplaces. So
I think that's so great to hear that it's making like a positive impact, I guess.
Yeah, and we don't want Kath's death to be in vain. We don't want any death to be in vain. And if this is one small way we can impact that, then I think that's a win.
Yeah, 100%. Right. Oh, sorry, I just need to reset after that.
Sorry, it's pretty heavy.
So I think you mentioned like a key reason for your successes was getting that responses from the right people. Yeah. What tactics or ways have you used to kind of get those right people in the conversation?
Yeah, so we have our corporate comms team. I'm the Yammer Manager, and there's a team of civilian staff. Thanks, Steve. There's a team of civilian staff that I work with, and we sit across all of corporate comms and manage the Yammer platform. So the way we get the right people engaged in Yammer conversations when it might slip under the radar is we actually use the keyword functionality on Yammer to send notifications to the corporate comms position-based email address about if someone's talking about a member of command or a specific rank or something. So they might have actually tagged that person in, but the keyword monitoring will then pop up in our inbox, and then we can get in touch with either the leader themselves or their advisors or staff officers or the likes to bring them into the conversation. If it is something that we do need to sort of ramp up the comms about, then we can, we can use our comms advisors to perhaps give some talking points and just, making sure, right person, right message, right time.
Yeah, and I think using that kind of getting your leaders on top of it does make Yammer a place where I guess your frontline workers see that change can happen.
Yes, absolutely. We have a community called Upfront, and the Upfront community is all about reducing those administrative burdens. So it's the place that the Connie on the van can say, this process is ridiculous. Why are we still using fax machines? Fun fact, Victoria Police would fall over if our fax machines fell over. We are completely reliant on fax machines for everything we do, but now it's digital fax. So we can, Connie can say, here's a suggestion for how we can improve this. What do you reckon? And wheels are then, fun facts, and wheels are then in motion. And we can have people who can actually adopt change and influence this, getting into the discussion too.
Yeah, I think we've commented.
Okay.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, Emily. I think this is probably one of our final questions. So overall, do you think Yammer has changed the culture of Victoria Police, and has this kind of influenced your other communication strategies?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm the Yammer Manager. I'm going to say it's completely overhauled the culture of Victoria Police. We are the winners. But it has started to change that conversation around just being a number, just being a position number, just being your registered number. You're a person, and that's bringing yourself, and whether that's posting a photograph of your garden or your lawn if you're a lawn fanatic, or your pet. I've got an 18-month-old Groodle that everyone knows about, because why wouldn't they know about my Groodle on the Pets of Victoria Police Yammer community? So bringing people into the conversation and creating these networks that mightn't have previously existed, using those social communities to connect and then relying on those connections later in a professional environment, really has started the wheels in motion to change the culture around you are performing your role in your position number at the moment. You can now bring a lot more to the table.
Well, that's wonderful. I think that's kind of concludes our time allocation. We're right on time. Maddie, thanks. Thank you for spending time with us to share Victoria Police's story. I think we can open up any Q&A if anyone has any questions.
We're going to keep the Q&A running in the main stage here if you just missed my message in the chat. So there's no need to jump into the discussion room. We'll just keep this running for the next 10 minutes or as many questions we have for Jonathan and Mads, of course. You can raise your hand if you like, if you want to actually jump in and ask the question or use the Q&A functionality.
I had a quick question. Thank you so much, Madeline, for sharing the Victoria Police story with us. I'm just wondering, have you thought about partnering with any retail organizations that might be using Yammer? I've spoken with some retail organizations that are using Yammer for things like loss prevention, and I'm wondering if that's something that you've thought about as a way to extend your network.
Yeah, look, we haven't yet. We're still, Yammer's still in its infancy with VicPol. We don't even have Yammer on bring your own device yet. So you've got to be using your work computer and the likes. But the one thing from a retail sort of, loss prevention side of things that it has enabled us to do is we already use a database called Aura, which is used by, places like Bunnings and Coles and the likes for petrol drive-offs. So we're able to socialise the existence of that on the Yammer platform and sort of cross-pollinate, I guess, if you will, the intelligence on that. So it's allowed us to have these conversations and then sort of report back. So if our bosses, have a conversation with this retailer, then, they can jump in and sort of share how that conversation went and then feedback later. So it creates this feedback loop and keeps everyone in the conversation. But that's a really interesting point in terms of, opening up the Yammer communities and, being able to jump in. Like, I know there are lots of retailers that do use Yammer, so it would be like an interesting thing to explore. Yeah, an external community. Yeah. Any other final questions? Anyone interested in jumping in?
Or if you have questions for Carla as well.
Oh, perfect.
I have a question. It's Matt here from Engage Squared. Nice to see you again, Maddie. Glad to hear your stories. I guess, how beneficial do you think it has been with you being that sort of uniformed officer going into that role? And how have you kind of reconciled the differences between what would be a kind of traditional uniformed role and the role that you're performing now as your sort of Yammer manager?
Hand on heart, I wouldn't be able to do this job without the experience I have had in frontline policing. Conversely, I also wouldn't be able to do this job without the comms team behind me that prop me up and make me look good when all I know is how to put handcuffs on people. So it's sort of, I'm really fortunate that I can rely on these comms experts for the comms side of things. But like I said at the very start, casting that operational lens over everything and knowing, what the membership is saying and how they're feeling about certain things and certain changes is absolutely critical, because in our sworn world, I'm a sergeant first. So I could be a sergeant anywhere in the state in any sergeant role, but at the moment, I'm the Yammer manager. Tomorrow, I could be the frontline operational sergeant for Melbourne CBD, and it can happen like that. But my comms specialist, VPS staff, are employed because they're comms specialists. So I rely really heavily on them and they rely really heavily on me. So it's an absolutely symbiotic relationship. But in terms of being the, sort of, pains me to say, but the face of Yammer for, for the launch, I have to remind people and let people know who've never met me in the organisation that I am not coming to them from the ivory towers. I'm coming to them from frontline, Western Suburbs, detective, investigator. First and foremost, I'm not trying to sell them this corporate product because we think it's sexy. I'm trying to bring an operational efficiency to the table.
Great question. Thanks, Matt.
Sorry, I have to ask you this, Matt, because I'm just so interested in this. There's always been this, special culture in police around need to know, and you've got to be careful. At the same time, intelligence is the lifeblood of policing. So there seems to be these two sort of powers that pull in different directions. One is saying we should really be sharing everything, and the other one saying, oh, we can't really share, and we need to be careful about who we tell what. How have you? It seems like Yammer has still found this way where you would just it's all for sharing. Does that contradict some police officers' values and what they think ought to be shared and what shouldn't be shared?
Yeah, it absolutely does, and that's a really big. That was a really big challenge for us when we were doing all our risk assessments and our information management assessments before we, flicked the magic on button for Yammer. So a lot of it is about, as you said earlier in the chat, the need to know culture. So when we disseminate, say, circulars or whatnot, you could say someone's wanted for the most heinous crime, that goes out to all organisations straight away via email. But if something was protected by legislation, that there are certain things we can't disclose, like, for example, someone's status on the sex offenders register, there's specific legislation around that. We need to be really mindful of that. But things, not just Yammer, even Teams channels, we're able to use closed communities, so your private communities, or closed Teams channels where things are more operationally sensitive, or it's sort of a case-by-case basis, as horses for courses. But that need to know is still does remain first. But we know that people have previously used unsanctioned apps for conversations around who they're looking for or those sorts of things. So providing them an in-house tool that we know is secure and is auditable, sort of it gets them off the unsanctioned apps. So they're not using WhatsApp, they're not using Signal, they're using something that we have control over. And I say control in a sort of more flippant way, but it's a safer place for them to be.
Yeah, definitely. And also relies on trusting the community managers, right, to manage those permissions.
Absolutely. So making sure that the right people are in the conversations at the right time, and but also trusting our staff, trusting that people are employed with VicPol for a reason. They don't get a job with us until their background checks are all done and whatnot. So handing the baton over to them, in the sake of sworn police officers, we give them a gun. Why wouldn't we give them intelligence?
Very good point. Let's make you kind of think.
All
right. Let's see. Is there any comments?
And I just want to say, while I've got both Matt and Jonathan here, both absolute integral parts of the Yammer launch, mic drop, the Yammer launch for Victoria Police, absolutely thrilled to be guided by your team. It was, something that we absolutely couldn't have done without the guidance of, Engage Squared and SWOOP, and being able to show our leadership evidence through SWOOP. Like I said, cops love evidence. SWOOP is our evidence.
That's good. Thanks so much. We didn't prepare that. But,
no.
We appreciate it. I think it's great working with Victoria Police. You get to, as a Victorian, it's good to see that there's the organisation from the inside in some way.